Warning: the following story contains dark subjects, such as emotional distress, self-deletion, and cannibalism. Viewer discretion is advised. Bill was worried, and he had good reason to be. Bill had two children named Rose and Magnus Tucker. Magnus was 16 years old to Rose's 12. On this particular day, Bill Tucker was striding back and forth restlessly in the living room, running his hands through his hair and glancing at the clock every 2 minutes or so. What was he so worried about, you ask? The answer to this question can be summed up into two words: his children. Magnus Tucker is a tall, athletic teenager with wavy, dirty blonde hair and sparkling brown eyes. He's a sophomore at his high school in the 10th grade. His sister, Rose Tucker, was an attractive young lady with long, light blonde hair and sea green eyes. Rose is in the 7th grade at her junior high school. Though she is quite young, she has had 3 boyfriends, the third of whom she is still dating. The past 2 were abusive, so she broke up with them. She met her third boyfriend, Mike, this year, and he's a boy at about 5'1", with waxed black hair and a tattoo of a green one-up mushroom on his upper right bicep that is usually hidden by the sleeve of his shirt. Every day after school, Magnus and his girlfriend, Kathleen, would walk to Rose's school to wait until she was dismissed from class by the final bell. When she was dismissed, she would walk out and meet them with Mike, and then they would all go to the nearby 7-Eleven for a snack. After that, they all walked home together, dropping each other off in this order: Kathleen, then Mike, and then Rose and Magnus would walk home together. On the occasions when they didn't go home, they would always text or call Bill to tell them where they were. Magnus and Rose always texted Bill when they didn't go straight home. They never forgot. Never. But there was no such text today. It was 3:27, and they still weren't home yet. They hadn't texted yet either. Bill both texted and called both of their cells, to no avail. He sent several text messages and phone calls to his ex-wife, telling her that Magnus and Rose hadn't come home or answered their cells, and that he may have to call the police, with no reply. Did she even care? Well, it's true that she hadn't so much as said goodbye to Magnus and Rose when she left, so no, she probably didn't care, or else she would have been bombarding Bill's phone with frantic questions like a proper mother would. Bill thought. If she would have been bombarding his phone, it would have been with accusations, not worries. When their divorce had become official, Bill had become depressed, but he rapidly realized he had to get a hold of himself for his children. At the time, Magnus was 10 years old and Rose 6. Magnus was old enough to at least have an idea of how serious a divorce was, but Rose, at the time, barely grasped the concept. Bill's children were the love of his life, and at the time of the divorce, Bill was worried his ex-wife might try to get custody over the kids. She could be quite persuasive when she wanted to be, using both her seductive voice and her physical appearance to her advantage. When people refused to be led by her slim, curvaceous figure and angelic facial features, that was when she became all hissy-pissy and demanding. Fortunately for Bill, she hadn't even tried. It was then that he flushed his wedding ring down the toilet. Now, as Bill paced back and forth in the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes, he thought he may never see his children again, never hear his daughter listening to pop music blasting from her speakers, or hear the pops of gunfire emitting themselves from Magnus's computer, or ever see their eyes looking into his own again. Trying to cheer himself up and ease his worries, he thought to himself, I may just be exaggerating. They may be at the park, hanging out with their chums, or at a friend's house, having fun playing video games, or Monopoly, or... What? Where the hell did that thought come from? It doesn't matter. What does matter is that Bill may be overreacting over nothing whatsoever. They may be having so much fun they forgot to text him. Yeah. They must have lost track of time or something. That could be it. Yeah. But somehow, he wasn't convinced. Now it was 5:06 p.m., and they still hadn't come home or texted Bill or answered their phones. Bill had already called Magnus and Rose's teachers, asking them if Magnus and Rose were present during their classes, and not a single class was missed by either of them. In other words, perfect attendance for the entire day. Bill then called Kathleen, and the conversation went like this. "Hello, is this Kathleen Blair?" "Oh, yes, this is. Who is this? If you're advertising anything, then I'm sorry, I'm not interested." No, I'm not calling to advertise anything. In fact, that's probably the farthest thing from my mind at the moment." Okay, who is this? What can I do for you?" My name is Bill Tucker, and I'm..." "Bill Tucker? As in Magnus Tucker's dad?" "Yes." "What can I do for you then, Mr. Tucker? Is something wrong?" "Something may be. I need to ask you a question." "Am I in some kind of trouble?" No, Kat, you're not in trouble of any sort with me. I already know what you two do." Kat was silent. "Kathleen, did you see Magnus and Rose today? Please answer truthfully. This is very important." There was a pause. Then, "Yes. Mike and I saw them both today. After school, we all went to the 7-Eleven for a snack. And then I was walked home. You're gonna have to ask Mike what happened after that, because I wasn't there." "Okay. Thank you, Kathleen." Bill, Mr. Tucker, is something wrong? Are Magnus and Rose missing?" "That's what I'm trying to find out, Kat, and you've been a big help. Bye." Bill hung up. Mike basically said the same thing as Kat. They all went to the 7-Eleven, bought a snack, and then walked Kat home, and Magnus and Rose walked Mike home. "After that," says Mike, "I didn't see them. I assumed they were walking home like normal, except Magnus seemed a bit disturbed, a bit distracted." Bill thanked him and hung up. Pacing the living room, Bill glanced at the clock again. It was 5:17 p.m. Bill then decided to call the police. On the phone, he explained the situation. The police would be there shortly. When Bill heard 3 quick raps at the door, he sprinted towards it and swung it open. "Hello, officers," Bill said in a panicky, worried tone. "I'm so glad you're here. Come in, come in." Bill led the 2 officers into the living room and told them they could sit if they liked. They sat on the couch, and Bill repeated the situation to them. One officer pulled out a small notepad and a pen and began asking Bill questions. The officer wrote down Bill's panicked replies and then asked if they could do a thorough search of the perimeter with Bill's permission, merely for precautionary purposes. Bill replied immediately and without question, "Of course, of course." After the initial search, which they saw and found nothing suspicious or punishable by law, the policeman, with Bill's permission, took 1 article of worn clothing from each of Bill's children's rooms, so that their bloodhounds could sniff out their scent, and a piece of DNA was also taken from each of their rooms for analysis, and comparing in case the policeman found bodies. They had taken a strand of hair from Rose's hairbrush and a nail clipping from Magnus's room. Bill handed them a picture of Magnus and Rose, and the officers left, promising to file 2 missing reports. It was now 6:49 p.m. Bill walked into the living room and sat on the couch, put his head in his hands, and sobbed hopelessly. For the next week, there wasn't a single trace of either Magnus or Rose. Bill was depressed, his hope diminishing by the day. Hell, Bill even contemplated suicide. After all, his life wasn't worth living without his children. He had, in fact, gotten close, so close, to making himself a bath, getting in, and then slitting crosses into his wrists and going out like Stan in Stephen King's infamous It. But his small, though diminishing, spark of feeble hope kept him away from the knife. Bill was supposed to go to work during the week, but he didn't go. Instead, he stayed home to stare mindlessly at nothing, or sleep. That's all he did, except use the bathroom and eat and drink. He only got up when absolutely necessary, only when his hunger or thirst became particularly desperate. He never answered the phone, even when he saw he knew the number. Never ate or drank unless he had to, and usually only enough to keep him alive. Never went out of the house. He never even opened the front door for the people of the neighborhood who had heard about his predicament and wanted to give their condolences or offer a shoulder to cry on. They would bring gifts. They would walk up to the door, knock, and wait, and then knock again, and wait some more, until they sighed in defeat and left their gifts on the welcome mat and left. The gifts would sit there on the mat until some hobo would steal them in glee. The only time Bill would open that door is if he heard a very official sounding knock, the knock policemen have and seem to work for, and a policeman's voice shouting, "It's the police!" Then, hopefully, that line would be followed by, "We found your children." Add the word alive after that. Yeah, that's better. But Bill just continued to stare at the wall. He'd become a living zombie. When the door knocked for the 9th or 10th time that week, and it wasn't an official sounding knock, mind you, Bill barely heard it. He was staring mindlessly at the blank television screen. A minute later, however, whoever was out there knocked again. Once again, Bill ignored it. But something deep inside of him stirred restlessly. Something was telling him from the deepest recesses of his mind that whoever was out there, policeman or not, was important. A key to his questions, to getting answers. His dreams. Gah. Yes, his dreams. Throughout the entire week, Bill has dreaded going to sleep because of the reoccurring dreams. In these dreams, he's in a dark room, and his children are on the floor, leaned against the wall, tied up and gagged. They're both unconscious. Bill seemed to be in a basement of some sort, made entirely of stone, and lit by a small, dim, flickering candle that sent the devil's shadows dancing along the walls. There's a table nearby, and on it, Bill wants to throw up, but for some reason he can't seem to do so. It seemed, strangely, that the body he was in was somebody else's and not his own, a body he shouldn't be in at all at that moment. It didn't feel right. It just felt obscenely wrong, and he knows he's not supposed to be here, not supposed to be seeing this. He was seeing this through someone else's eyes, someone else's vision, forced to see and experience whatever this person sees or experiences, whether it be good or bad. Astral projection, is it called? Whatever it was freaking the hell out of Bill. He could feel the cold draft of this underground room. He could see the flickering shadows dancing across the walls with perfect clarity. And yet, these sensations belonged to another person. Bill could still feel these and harbor his own emotions at the same time. When Bill saw his children, unconscious, tied up and gagged, he tried to scream, but nothing emitted from his vocal cords but an evil, cold snicker. Bill, but of course, it wasn't Bill. Was it? It walked steadily towards the table. Oh God, no, not the table. One of Bill's hands reached out, and in the dim light, he couldn't tell what color his skin was. The hand seized one of the many sharp contraptions that rested upon the table, and another cold, cruel snicker emitted itself from his lips. The table was stained with old blood in most places, and the blood stained some of the sharp, deadly contraptions lying before him. Not Bill's hand slowly turned the contraption in his hand, admiring its sharpness, its lethalness, its ability to get the job done. Then, Bill turned, with the metal contraption clutched in his hand, towards his gagged, unconscious children. Magnus began to stir, and Bill, no, not Bill, chuckled, walking towards Magnus. Bill knelt down to Magnus's level, holding the lethal contraption in his hand, framed in dark, flickering shadows that danced upon him. Then Magnus's eyes slowly opened, surveying his surroundings murkily. "What?" he began, and then, to Bill's utter horror, his hand moved by itself, like it had a mind of its own, and slapped Magnus in the face. Magnus's head whipped back and slammed into the wall, the whack still echoing in the still air. Bill's palm tingling. No, the person's palm tingling. Gah! It was hard to distinguish which sensations were his own, or the person's he was inhabiting. Blood trickled down Magnus's chin. He didn't look up, but he spoke. The force of the slap had dislodged the gag from Magnus's mouth, enabling him to speak. You won't get away with this," Magnus slurred. "Dad'll have the police looking for us. You'll get caught." Bill, not Bill, smirked. "Sure. But the thing is, kitty, I won't get caught." Bill's hand twirled the lethal contraption in a circle, slowly, tauntingly. The faint flickering light of the soul candle making shadows dance upon the tarnished metal. "It's been 2 whole days. Days! They still haven't got the faintest clue where the fuck you are. Where's the police when you need them? Why have them at all? You dig what I'm saying?" Magnus muttered something. "Well, speak up, boy. Or did I break your mouth?" "I said," Magnus began, his voice nearly incomprehensible. "You can hurt me. Do whatever you want with me. But please, don't hurt Rose. I'm begging you." "And why should I do as you say?" Bill's mouth said of its own accord, an air of malignant amusement in his voice. His hand traced the blade of the contraption slowly down the side of Magnus's face, causing blood to bead in a straight line and trickle down his cheek. Magnus still wouldn't look him in the eye, but he quietly seethed. "Well, come on now, boy. Answer me. Why should I do as you say?" Magnus spoke quietly, but surely. "Because," he whispered, "because I'd die for my Rose." Bill's esophagus let out an amused bark. "How touching. Well, both of you will be experiencing the dying tonight." Magnus's eyes widened, but he still didn't look up. "No, please, spare her. You can have me. Do whatever it is you please. But I beg of you, please, have mercy and spare the girl. Spare Rose. Be merciful." "Well, I don't think you have a say in this at all," Bill said cruelly, getting up and heading back to the table. Bill felt revolted. He tried to wake up, tried to at least change this dream to another one, but his efforts were futile. As Bill couldn't help but walk to the table, the boots he was wearing clopped on the floor. Now, don't you worry," not Bill, said. "I'll have mercy by killing her quicker. That's an appropriate way to show mercy, don't you think?" His fingers danced over the table grotesquely, searching, seeking, and ever so avid. "And plus, my boy, you'll both be together in the afterlife, you dig?" Magnus remained silent, staring at the floor as tears dripped off his chin. Bill could hear it with perfect clarity when Magnus whispered, "Rose, I'm so sorry. As a brother, I failed to protect you. His voice dropped so Bill could barely make it out. "I love you." Bill's hands closed on a specific device. "Oh, no. Oh, God, no." And Bill, "God damn it, not Bill," crouched in front of Magnus. "You first," he said, licking his lips. "Look me in the eye, boy. Can't you at least do that? Have you no dignity in you? Come now, boy. Do as I say. Magnus refused. Man, you were so damn stupid. Bill scoffed against his will. Magnus, Rose, your father's gotten into a terrible accident. Come quick, get in the back. I'll take you there. Bill chuckled. Shit for brains, he muttered, chuckling again. Bet you didn't expect to get knocked out in the back, did you? I brought you back to my house, dragged your limp asses inside with the help of an anonymous friend. And down here, hidden room directly next to my basement. We're underground, so no one can hear your screams. Bill, against his own will, raised his hand and brought the electric saw up to Magnus's tender neck. Bill muttered mindlessly, slowly dragging the blade lightly across the lump that consisted of Magnus's Adam's apple, piercing his flesh. Now, do as I say, boy, Bill heard himself say quietly, and look me in the damn eyes, or your sis here will know the true meaning of the word dismemberment. You dig? Magnus swallowed, his mouth like a hole of sandpaper. Come on, boy. Do as I tell you. Do as I say, and look me in the eyes. Magnus slowly, ever so slowly, lifted his head. His eyes were looking everywhere at once. There 1 second, gone the next. And then Bill established eye contact with his one and only son. Bill found himself chuckling evilly. See, boy? What do you have to fear about making eye contact, my boy? Magnus's eyes widened in terror as he stared into the eyes of this cruel, cold, merciless man who lived without a heart to anchor his soul. And right before the electric saw turned on, it gorily tore through Magnus's neck, blood spattering the walls in great red spurts and rivulets. Magnus saw this cold-hearted man with no soul smile gruesomely, and Magnus said one word before the electric saw executed his impending death. Dad? It was always at this time that Bill would jerk awake with a soundless scream, his eyes shooting open, his fingers grasping, drenched in a cold sweat, and a line of spittle running down his cheek. Every time he awoke from this, he could not remember most aspects of the dream, but the one thing he always remembered was his son's haggard, dirty face, staring into his eyes, and Magnus's one horror-filled whisper of Dad. Now, as Bill thought of his recurring dreams, that anonymous something deep inside of him stirred restlessly, giving him a strange sense of urgency. It was like it was his conscience, maybe, or something similar to it, so to say, giving him a feeling like he needed to open that door, had to open that door, this instant, because whoever was on the other side was going to provide all the answers. So Bill got up. He got up with an actual reason to get up for the first time that week, except for necessities such as eating and relieving himself. Bill slowly stretched, groaning at the slightly pleasant pain as he stretched his cramped muscles. Another interrupted his stretching, and so, slumped, he walked slowly to the front door, as whoever it was knocked again. As Bill got closer to the door, his vague feeling of importance grew and grew steadily in insistency. Then, Bill reached the front door, mentally bracing himself for whoever he might see. He hesitated for a second, then reached for the doorknob as another chorus of knocks was heard. All right, Bill yelled, swinging the door open. What do you want? Bill demanded rudely. Then he said, Hey, you're that schmuck from the gas station. The schmuck from the gas station smiled thinly. Yes, hello. My name is Zeke. Zeesk. Yes, I know it's a strange name. I hear people call it weird all the time. He had black, scraggly hair, brown eyes that were large and dark upon his face, and a dark, chocolate-colored complexion, with a small nose and big lips that were pale upon his face. What do you want? Zeke, nonplussed, said quietly, I heard about your children, and I empathize. I lost my own son 13 years ago in a car accident. He was only 5 years old at the time, so I personally know the grief you must feel. The reason I'm over today is because I'd like to invite you to my place, maybe offer you a shoulder to cry on. Because, I mean, man, no offense intended, but you look terrible. I've got booze, and I can even make you dinner, if you like. Zeke then stood silently, politely waiting for an answer, his large, nearly black eyes watching Bill for a reaction. Something had momentarily changed in Zeke's voice, but Bill couldn't precisely determine what. Bill was about to immediately say the word no, when that something that may or may not have been his conscience, flared in Bill, another vague feeling, a feeling like he should say yes, instead of the curt no he had planned on saying. Of course, this feeling came no explanation, it was just there. Like gravity is always there, and a thought is rarely given to it. And also, he did look terrible. There were dark bags under his eyes, his slightly long black hair was disheveled, his face was unshaven, leaving behind a scratchy stubble on his chin and cheeks. So instead of the planned no emerging from his lips, what actually emerged was, sure, I guess it could do me some good. 15 minutes later, Bill was at Zeke's front door. Whatever's so important, Bill told his conscience, it better be good. His conscience declined comment. Zeke unlocked the front door and shoved it open with a small ta-da. Zeke said pleasantly, after you. So Bill walked into the long, dark hallway, Zeke trailing behind. And Bill failed to realize it when Zeke locked the door behind him. Zeke followed Bill down the hallway, flicking the light switches on as he went, filling the house with light. Zeke advanced ahead of Bill, leading him past a kitchen and a dining room, then a bedroom, into the living room. Zeke told him to please sit, so he could get the booze out. Whiskey or beer? Zeke asked, and Bill shrugged, stating, well, I don't really care. And the truth was, he didn't. He didn't care much about anything anymore, except for anything that may lead him to his kids. As Zeke walked away, Bill surveyed his surroundings. The dining room was evidently directly next to the living room he sat in, and a large mahogany table was set in the middle of it, cheap wooden chairs surrounding it. In the living room, there were two long, pillowed white couches, and a comfortable-looking brown armchair. In the middle of the living room was a glass coffee table, with a couple of R.L. Stine's novels resting upon its surface, both of which he'd read in college. A Midsummer's Night's Scream and Superstitious. A large flat-screen television was set in the corner of the living room, currently mute and dark. On one wall was a sliding glass door, which led to a back porch. On the wall opposite Bill was a closed door, which must have led to Zeke's bedroom. Everything seemed somewhat ordinary about his surroundings, except for the paintings. The paintings were the strangest part. All around the house, multiple paintings adorned the walls, both large and small, of butcher knives. Most showed red, blood-stained knives, but some showed the clean metal of the blades, with light reflecting off of them. The painted blood was of a dark, dark red. Why would Zeke hang up such peculiar paintings around the house? Bill jumped. There was that thought again, right out of the blue, and possibly into the black. What did it mean? Did it have to do with where he was now? Think, his conscience seemed to tell him. Then Zeke walked back in, with 2 glass beer bottles in hand. Well, I see you're admiring my paintings. They're very state of the art. Bill seemed to be drawn towards one specific painting. The blade of this one was stained almost to the hilt in blood. Blood seemed dark and rusty, almost brown. What about that one? Bill asked, pointing. What about it? Zeke seemed to appear awfully amused that Bill had asked about that one specific painting. Bill shrugged, uncomfortable. I don't know. Something, just something, about this one specific painting seemed to call out to Bill. Well, I brought the beer, Zeke said pleasantly. Bud Light. You like Bud Light? I think it's okay, Bill surmised. They both sat on the couches, and they began to talk. Every once in a while, Zeke would go back into the kitchen, telling Bill to wait here a second, please. And Bill would find himself drawn again to that one specific painting of the bloody butcher knife. It was disturbing. Then Zeke would walk back in and they'd start talking again. Ever since Bill had walked into Zeke's house, his vague feeling of importance had grew. But as he talked to Zeke, this feeling ebbed a bit. It was quite evident that Zeke did know Bill's grief, and Bill began to take a liking to him. It was about half an hour later that Zeke was in the kitchen, and Zeke's voice called out, "Dinner's done." He walked out of the kitchen and put 2 steaming plates onto the table, then walked back in and came out with a bowl of potatoes and a plate of cornbread, setting those onto the table as well. Each of their plates was a large, juicy slab of white meat. Bon appetit, Zeke said, and they both sat down and began to eat. The meat was warm and juicy, and tasted amazing, even more so with A1 sauce. It was the most delicious thing Bill had ever tasted. He was quickly done with his meat, then had 2 amazing scoops of potatoes. The cornbread was slathered in honey, warm and sweet and soft, like warm clouds of a buttery crust. I have way more meat that you can eat, Zeke told Bill. You just have to ask, and you can eat as much as you want. If Bill had a conversation with the vague, warning feeling inside of him, it would have gone something like this. Something's fishy here. But this meat is so good. Nevertheless, be careful. He could be poisoning you. Zeke? Poison me? That only happened in a nightmare, not reality. Just heed my warning and be careful. Pay attention. When Bill was full, he belched merrily and took a sip of his Bud Light. Then he realized Zeke hadn't eaten a single bite. Something was wrong. How'd it taste, Bill? Zeke asked quietly. Oh, this meat was the most delicious I've ever tasted. What is it, pork chop? So it tasted good? Zeke ignored his question. Yes, simply marvelous. Bill didn't like the way Zeke was staring at him, as if Zeke knew something Bill didn't. What spices did you use? Do you know what you just ate, Bill? Zeke asked quietly, a weird glint in his eye. Do you mean the type of food I just ate, or what type of meat I just ate? Bill managed to say without his nervousness becoming too evident in his voice. Why does it matter? Thought Bill wildly. What type of meat, Bill? Zeke replied softly. I'm not really sure, in fact, Bill said nervously. Is it pork chop? So you have no idea what you just ate, and you ate it nonetheless? Zeke's voice had an edge to it that Bill did not like, not one bit. I guess so. I never really give a thought to what animal I'm eating, Bill replied uneasily. Why was Zeke staring at him like that? Well, you need to change that. You dig what I'm saying? Zeke asked. Bill's eyes widened in horror. He'd heard that before. Do you know what meat you just ate, Bill? Zeke's voice had risen an octave, and a psychotic undertone now marked it thickly. The tone of a man gone mad. The scary glint in his eye grew. Bill shifted nervously. He knew it was a mistake to come here. Oh, I see. Zeke stared at him. I see, Bill repeated. I see you're trying to scare me. Honestly, Zeke, why? What did you eat, Bill? Zeke shouted madly, eyes wide and crazed. I don't know, okay? Bill finally exploded. I just don't know. Zeke lowered himself back into his chair, apparently satisfied. Then he said, Human flesh. What? Bill roared, rearing back in his chair so hard his chair cracked the wall. Human flesh. He said it so calmly. Bill began to hyperventilate, panting loudly like a thirsty dog. He began to chug down the rest of his Bud Light, trying to get the taste out of his mouth. And he had thought the meat was delicious. He said so. Bill wanted to barf it all back up, as if to undo the oblivious act of cannibalism he just committed. Cannibalism! Cannibal! Oh, I'm not the cannibal here, Bill. You are. You ate the meat. I didn't. Oh God, Bill was gonna hurl. In a way, everyone has at least an ounce of cannibalistic DNA in them. And that's what made you believe the meat tasted better than any you've ever had. Pork, beef, chicken. It was the cannibalistic desires in you passed down from our cannibalistic ancestors. It was calling to you, revealing itself in your taste buds and desires. Bill retched loudly, gagging, slamming his empty Bud Light bottle onto the table, causing the glass bottle to crack along the side loudly. And when my son died, Zeke continued, speaking calmly as if they were having a normal chat, I couldn't bear to bury him. To be 6 feet underground, concealed by 6 feet of dirt and trapped in the darkness. That's not something I could imagine my 5-year-old son embracing. So I found a compromise. And it was a compromise worthy of the best of our ancestors. Because I had found a way to keep him with me, within me. Never to part except by death, I guess you could say. So I ate my son's corpse. Bill couldn't believe what he was hearing, what he was being told. It was worse than the one spat he had with a professor in college. And he didn't like to think of that, but this was a whole new level of horrific. You see, I figured that if I ate his corpse, ate his being, he'd be with me, be in me. And so I went along and did just that. First, I ate his brains, which were kind of salty, and had the texture of those cups of slime children play with, you know, the containers, but more gelatinous, like Jell-O. Eating his brain kept his thoughts with me. And then I ate his eyes, so I could conceive what he had, and preserve the memories of what he'd seen in his short life. The short memories he had before his untimely demise. Then I proceeded to eat his, well, basically everything that was in him that helped him function and live, including such organs as his pancreas, liver, part of his lungs, only part because they were like slimy hollow bags, not enjoyable. Both his large and small intestine, and finally, the one that was the most important, core of his being, his heart. It tasted metallic and was juicy with his fluids. And I devoured it, finishing the transplant of his being into mine at last. And I did it all in less than 2 days, gorging myself on his remains, until mostly bones were left. Because I needed all of him, or he'd only be partial, incomplete. Not my son, but an insufficient version of him. Imperfect, defective, fragmentary, incomplete. By consuming him, I found a way for him to always be with me. Now my son and I are together, and I am complete. And we will remain together forever, at least until I die. Then I'll be together with him in a less, or more, if you think of it in another way, literal sense. But you see my meaning. Bill clutched his roiling stomach, certain he was about to upchuck everything that was in his belly. He fought to keep himself from throwing up in horrific disgust, though he had half a mind to empty his stomach of its vile contents. You may be disgusted, horrified, in disbelief that I'd do such a thing, but you have no idea how similar we are inside. Bill, you and I lost my child. You lost your children. I ate my child. You? Well, I think you know who you ate now, don't you? Something stopped Bill cold. Now, Bill stared into the eyes of the person who'd so cunningly tricked him into an act of cannibalism. 2 kids? Bill's heart stopped. Now, you and your children can be together. Bill sobbed. I did it for you. You and your children are now one. Bill screamed hoarsely in both grief and disbelief at what he had done. You are now complete with your kin. You dig what I'm saying? Tears coursed their way down Bill's face, leaving their wet streams behind. Zeke reached under the table, and then both his hands emerged, with something clutched in each one. 2 heads. Their mouths were wide open in gapes of pure terror, and their eyes had been gouged out of their heads, leaving glistening, fleshy craters where they had once been. Blood had poured down their faces from those meaty craters, leaving thick, red streams down their cheeks, like rivers of bloody tears. Their heads were scalped, revealing bits of brain and tufts of clinging wet hair. Torn flesh and bones and arteries hung down from their necks raggedly, as if cut with an electric saw. Feeling faint, Bill rose. They're dead. Both of them. They're dead. Oh God, they're dead. He then staggered through the house, giving the painting that had so mysteriously attracted him one last look. That last look suddenly opened in him another realization, one involving the painting, particularly the rusty color of the painted blood on the blade. And Bill finally did hurl, bile and undigested food rising up from his throat and spewing out of his mouth in slimy chunks, splattering thickly and wetly onto the floor. He made it to the front door, only to discover it was locked. Apparently, there were keyholes on both sides of the doorknob. When he turned around, he saw Zeke standing no more than 10 feet away, framed in shadow from the lights shining brightly behind him, making him a solitary shadow confronting Bill. There was a wide, psychotic, maniacal grin plastered on his face, and a butcher knife was clutched tightly in his hand, blade facing the floor. As Zeke stood facing Bill, figures began to slowly manifest around Zeke's form, one by one, seeming to slowly spiral forth from the floor, until a conglomerate of shadowy and ethereal shadows stood surrounding him, all facing Bill, and standing slightly behind Zeke. The proliferation of these wispy, shadowy forms gradually multiplied, and the light shining from the bulbs behind Zeke seemed to dim as the number of silhouettes gradually grew, eventually dimming to almost entirety, to where there was nearly no amount of light in the house, and darkness began to claim the air. The figures were foggy and ethereal, not solid, but not exactly transparent, consisting of a smoky and wispy black substance, much like that of fire smoke. Soon a multitude of these shadows had formed around where Zeke stood, seeming to stand with him rather than merely being in the same area as him, almost like comrades or acquaintances. And eventually, they slowed down the reproduction and stopped spiraling forth from the tile of the floor like steam through a vent. A large group of these shadows now stood around, but slightly behind Zeke, all of them relatively human-shaped and fuzzy around the edges. One last figure slowly rose from the floor. This one rose not directly behind Zeke, but directly next to Zeke. A figure smaller than the others, whose tiny, shadowy hand was up and holding Zeke's. It was about the size of a 5-year-old child. You know, it really is a man-eat-man world out there, Zeke whispered, and Bill began to scream as Zeke raised the butcher's knife and began to approach him.